Who are the men that should be investigated? I'll name them right here. Leon Black. You don't even have to see past the redactions to see that this man needs to be investigated. Jess Staley, accused of terrible things. It's right there in the files. Why is he not being investigated? And Leslie Wexner. Why did the FBI list him as a co-conspirator?
5 minutes. That's all the time Representative Thomas Massie needed to do something no other member of Congress has been willing to do. Stand on the floor of the House of Representatives and name the specific individuals who should be investigated for their connections to Jeffrey Epstein's trafficking network. Not vague references to powerful people, not coded language about individuals of interest, not carefully worded statements designed to avoid legal liability, actual names, spoken clearly. On the official congressional record, in front of cameras broadcasting to millions of viewers, Leon Black, Jess Staley, Leslie Wexner. 3 men whose names appear throughout the Epstein files documenting horrific crimes, 3 men who have faced no arrests, no charges, no investigations from the FBI or Department of Justice, despite years of documented evidence linking them to Epstein's operation. And Massie made it crystal clear why nothing has happened, because while FBI Director Kash Patel was celebrating in the Olympic locker rooms overseas, while Attorney General Pam Bondi was deflecting questions in congressional hearings with carefully prepared non-answers, the actual criminals documented in over 3 million pages of evidence remain completely untouched by American law enforcement. What happens in those 5 minutes exposes something devastating. How the DOJ and FBI have the evidence, have the files, have the documentation of crimes committed by powerful men, and how they've done absolutely nothing with it. The House floor, a routine oversight session about Department of Justice accountability, standard procedure. Regular congressional business. Thomas Massie, representative from Kentucky's 4th District, walked to the podium with something different. Not talking points, not political theater. Names. He's an MIT-educated engineer who approaches problems systematically. Built multiple successful companies before entering Congress, known for asking questions that make people uncomfortable and refusing to accept non-answers as answers, and today he had 5 minutes allocated to speak about DOJ oversight. He would use every second to expose the biggest law enforcement failure of the decade. Congress created the Department of Justice, Massie began, his voice carrying the controlled frustration of someone who has watched this situation deteriorate for years. Congress funds the Department of Justice, and Congress is responsible for oversight of the Department of Justice. He paused, letting that constitutional framework sink in. When will we see justice? The question hung in the air, simple, direct, devastating in its implications. I'll tell you what I've not seen. I have not seen any arrests from the revelations in the Epstein files. He let that statement land. No arrests, despite everything that's been revealed. Despite all the evidence. Over 3 million documents describing horrible things, describing unspeakable things, so much of it redacted. 3 million documents. That's not a small investigation, that's not limited evidence. That's comprehensive documentation of a massive criminal enterprise. And yet, over 24 people have resigned, Massie continued, his voice rising slightly. CEOs, members of government worldwide. But I haven't seen any arrests or investigations here in the United States from this Department of Justice. He began listing what has happened in other countries. Real consequences. Actual accountability. Prince Andrew, Duke of York, who has since been stripped of his royal titles due to his affiliation with Jeffrey Epstein, arrested. Peter Mandelson, who previously served as UK's ambassador to the United States, resigned in disgrace from United Kingdom's House of Lords and the Labour Party. Arrested. Former Prime Minister of Norway, Torbjørn Jagland, charged. 3 high-profile figures, 3 different countries, 3 examples of law enforcement actually doing their job when faced with evidence of crimes. But we don't see any charges, arrests or investigations in the United States. The contrast was devastating. Other countries investigating and arresting powerful people based on the same evidence the FBI and DOJ possess. America doing nothing. What do we see? Massie asked, his frustration now clearly audible. We see our FBI director celebrating in the locker room at the Olympics overseas. The image was perfect. While international law enforcement was making arrests based on Epstein evidence, America's FBI director was at the Olympics, celebrating. As if there wasn't the largest sex trafficking investigation in history sitting on his desk waiting for action. It's fine to be proud of this country, Massie continued, but we should be proud of this country, because we have a system of justice that works. He paused for emphasis. And yet we do not. The indictment was complete. The system isn't working. The evidence exists. The crimes are documented. And nothing is happening. Then Massie did what no one else has been willing to do. Who are the men that should be investigated? I'll name them right here. The room got quieter. This wasn't typical congressional speech. This was about to become something unprecedented. Leon Black, the first name, chairman and CEO of Apollo Global Management, one of the world's largest private equity firms managing over $500 billion in assets. Billionaire investor with a net worth estimated at over $10 billion. His name appears throughout the Epstein files documenting payments to Epstein totaling over $150 million between 2012 and 2017, years after Epstein's 2008 conviction for soliciting prostitution from a minor. Over $150 million paid to a registered sex offender. For what services exactly? Black claimed the payments were for estate planning advice and tax services, $150 million for tax advice from a man whose primary business was sex trafficking. The explanation insults basic intelligence. You don't even have to see past the redactions to see that this man needs to be investigated, Massie said. The implication was devastating. Even with massive portions of the files redacted to protect privacy and ongoing investigations, Leon Black's connections to Epstein are so extensively documented that they're unavoidable. They're right there in the unredacted portions accessible to anyone who reads the files. The financial transactions alone demand investigation. The timeline alone, continuing payments years after Epstein's conviction, demands answers. Jess Staley, the second name, former CEO of Barclays Bank, one of the world's largest financial institutions, resigned from his position in November 2021 after UK financial regulators investigated his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein and concluded he had characterized it inaccurately. The Epstein files contain extensive documentation of Staley's connections to Epstein, email exchanges, visit logs to Epstein's properties, witness testimony describing their relationship, and according to Massie, allegations he described as terrible things, accused of terrible things. It's right there in the files. Why is he not being investigated? The question cut through all the careful language financial institutions use to avoid liability. Staley wasn't just a casual acquaintance of Epstein's. The files document a relationship extensive enough that UK regulators determined Staley had misrepresented it, extensive enough that he lost his position running a major global bank, and yet no FBI investigation, no DOJ charges, nothing from American law enforcement despite evidence sitting in files they've possessed for years. Leslie Wexner, the third name, and this one carried something even more damning than the others. Leslie Wexner founded Lulz Brands, the parent company of Victoria's Secret and Bath & Body Works, built a retail empire worth billions, one of the wealthiest people in Ohio, major Republican donor with deep political connections, and according to the FBI's own files, something much darker. Wexner was Epstein's primary client for decades, gave Epstein power of attorney over his finances, allowed Epstein to buy and sell properties on his behalf. The relationship was so close that Epstein essentially acted as Wexner's financial manager for years. The Victoria's Secret connection is particularly disturbing. Epstein had access to modeling agencies, access to young women in the fashion industry, access provided through his relationship with Wexner. Why did the FBI list him as a co-conspirator in their own documents in a child sex trafficking case, and then tell him, according to him, that they had no questions for him? Let that sink in completely. Read that sentence again slowly. The FBI's own documentation lists Leslie Wexner as a co-conspirator in a child sex trafficking case. Not a person of interest, not someone tangentially connected, a co-conspirator. That's the FBI's characterization in their own internal files. And then the FBI told him they had no questions, no interview, no interrogation, no follow-up investigation, despite listing him as a co-conspirator in one of the most serious crimes the federal government can prosecute. Despite his decades-long financial relationship with Epstein, despite the access to young models through Victoria's Secret. Why is that? Massie asked. The question everyone watching was now asking themselves: how does someone get listed by the FBI as a co-conspirator in child sex trafficking, and then face zero investigative follow-up? How does that happen in a functioning justice system? It doesn't. That's the answer. In a functioning system, that would be impossible. The fact that it happened reveals a system that isn't functioning at all. Massie then addressed the attempts to get answers about these decisions. The Epstein Files Transparency Act requires the DOJ and FBI to disclose to us their internal memos and emails about how they made those decisions, whether to prosecute or not prosecute. Congress passed legislation specifically designed to force transparency on these exact decisions. How did the DOJ and FBI decide who to investigate and who to protect? The law requires them to turn over their internal deliberations, yet they have not delivered those memos. Direct defiance of congressional law. The FBI and DOJ are simply refusing to comply with legislation requiring disclosure of their decision-making process. Why would they refuse unless those memos reveal exactly what everyone suspects? That the decision not to investigate these men was based on their wealth, their power, their political connections, that the system protected them instead of prosecuting them. But Massie wasn't finished, because there's an earlier layer to this cover-up, one that allowed all of this to continue for years longer than it should have. And we still don't have the memos and documents and emails from 2008 to explain why Jeffrey Epstein was given such a light sentence in what would have been an open and shut case of child sex trafficking. 2008, the first Epstein prosecution. Federal prosecutors in Florida had overwhelming evidence of child sex trafficking, over 30 victims willing to testify. Documentary evidence, flight logs showing transport of minors, witness statements from employees, bank records showing payments, everything needed for what should have been multiple life sentences. The lead prosecutor, Alexander Acosta, had prepared a 53-page federal indictment that would have put Epstein away for decades. The evidence was ironclad. The case was ready. Instead, Epstein got a sweetheart deal negotiated in secret. 13 months in a county jail. Not even a federal prison, where he was allowed to leave 6 days a week for 12 hours a day on work release. Essentially unsupervised freedom for most of each week while technically serving a sentence. The deal also granted immunity to any co-conspirators. Read that again. Anyone who helped Epstein traffic children got immunity as part of the deal. The men whose names appear throughout the files, the powerful people who participated in or facilitated the trafficking, all protected by that 2008 agreement, which allowed him to go back and recommit these terrible crimes, create hundreds of more victims, and ensnare so many other people in his conspiracy. The 2008 failure directly caused everything that came after. If Epstein had been properly prosecuted, then given the sentence his crimes warranted, he wouldn't have been free to continue trafficking for another decade. Hundreds of additional victims wouldn't exist. The network of powerful co-conspirators wouldn't have expanded. The 2008 cover-up enabled everything that followed. Where are those documents that describe those decisions? Still classified, still hidden, still protected despite congressional legislation demanding their release. Massie's voice carried genuine anger now. We need justice. We want the Department of Justice to get to work. And that's what they need to do now. 5 minutes. 3 names. Leon Black, Jess Staley, Leslie Wexner. All 3 appear extensively in the Epstein files. All 3 have documented connections to Epstein's trafficking operation. All 3 remain completely untouched by federal law enforcement. And Massie forced them into the congressional record, on camera. Undeniable. The speech immediately went viral. Within an hour, Leon Black, Jess Staley, and Leslie Wexner were all trending on social media. News outlets were scrambling to report on Massie's unprecedented naming of specific individuals. But more importantly, Massie had done something that changes the entire dynamic of this investigation. He made it impossible for the DOJ and FBI to continue hiding behind vague references to ongoing investigations and protecting the innocent. He named specific people. He cited specific evidence. He referenced the FBI's own characterization of Leslie Wexner as a co-conspirator. Now the question isn't whether investigations should happen. The question is why they haven't happened when the evidence clearly exists. Kash Patel can't deflect by talking about classification concerns when Massie just named 3 people based on unredacted portions of publicly available files. Pam Bondi can't hide behind privacy interests when one of those 3 men is literally listed in FBI documents as a co-conspirator in child sex trafficking. The excuses are gone. The cover-up is exposed. The names are public. And the pressure on DOJ and FBI to actually do their jobs just became impossible to ignore, because now it's not theoretical, it's not abstract, it's three specific men with three specific sets of evidence, all sitting in files the FBI and DOJ have possessed for years. Do your job. Investigate Leon Black. Investigate Jess Staley. Investigate Leslie Wexner. Or admit that the system isn't designed to hold powerful men accountable. Admit that wealth and political connections place people above the law. Admit that the FBI and DOJ exist to protect the elite rather than prosecute them. Those are the only two options now. Either investigate the men Massie named, or confirm that American justice is a lie told to maintain public faith in a system that serves only the powerful. Massie gave them 5 minutes to make that choice clear, and in doing so, he did more to advance accountability for Epstein's network than the FBI and DOJ have done in 5 years. Subscribe because this isn't over. Massie just forced these names into the public record, and now the pressure for actual investigations will be impossible to ignore. Share this everywhere, because the American people deserve to know that their FBI and DOJ have evidence of crimes committed by powerful men, and are choosing to do nothing. Thanks for watching.